Hi, everybody. Creating content is hard. Getting the content you create noticed by others, even harder. But there are things we can do. And to help highlight what some of those things are, I am thrilled to be chatting with Dan Hunter. Dan has been sharing very actionable tips and insights for quite some time through various forms of media, and I've personally benefited greatly from them. And I hope through our conversation you find some things that you're able to grok and glom onto that you're now able to use to make yourself more effective as a content creator. Or just sit back, relax, and just listen to a fun conversations between two people who enjoy creating content. See you all in a bit. Dan, great to chat with you. I had an intro video where I talked about why I really excited like your content and why I want to talk to you more and dig deeper into all the things you're doing. And so before we go further, just introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Daniel Hunter. I go by Dan, and I am a software engineer, also a creator, writer, and I try to share what I learn in public. It's a forcing function for me to actually, kind of uh, get into a routine and the habit of learning and growing. And yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Well, awesome. So you mentioned you're a software engineer, but you're also a prolific content creator. So what would you say is like your P0? Like, would you say you're a software engineer first, or would you say you're a content creator first?
Yeah, so I worked in entertainment full time. I still do, but I worked in entertainment full time prior to working in tech as an engineer, and you know, started my career kind of more as an artist. I kind of put on the artist hat first before the corporate employee hat kind of came into my life. And so, yeah, I'd take more creator than engineer. Although I see programming as just like a form, a medium of creation. So it's kind of hard for me to answer that question. But um, yeah, and uh, a lot of engineers use a technique called engineering as marketing. To kind of grow their brands, to kind of like build an audience. So like engineering is definitely a core part of like my creative, um, life. So
Nice. Do you fall in the camp of looking at programming and engineering as more of an art, or do you see it more like a mathematical, rigid science?
ah, ooh, that's good. Mm, I say more art to be honest, and I feel actually more strongly about that with the kind of um, like introduction of tools like GPT-3, which has kind of hit the internet by storm, uh, and it's becoming more important to like think of creative ways of leveraging technology than it is like to like deeply understand it. Um, and well, I'm actually going to kind of disagree with what I just said, which is funny. Like I do think there's so much value in understanding technology. Don't get me wrong. Like I don't want to answer that question in like a broad stroke, but I will say that um, you know if you have like a lot of depth in like one area and not as much breadth, um, it's I think um, going to be like harder for you to kind of compete because um, you know uh, a generalist that just knows how to leverage technology in creative ways and can like really kind of scale themselves and their ideas without having to really involve other human beings much is going to like I think excel more. And there's a reason why you've seen like solopreneurship and terms like that kind of catching fire, especially during the pandemic. Um, and a lot of folks talk about digital leverage, and that's kind of like what I'm speaking to. You know, not to say that being a computer scientist and understanding how open AI and how like the kind of algorithms that power all this amazing tools isn't important. Definitely not what I mean, but a creator that knows how to use all these tools and kind of piece things together and to help people solve problems, to kind of educate folks, to help people grow, to entertain. Those people are gonna like dominate.
Yeah, no, fully agree. And the way I often like to describe it is that it used to be that in order to ship software, let's use software as an example here, it required different people with extremely deep domain expertise across various stages of stuff like the inner and outer dev loops and so on to be able to get something out the door. What we've seen with technology and abstraction, all these layers, is that, like you mentioned, one person can potentially be able to handle all parts of software development lifecycle. They need to have one area where they're a little deep, and usually it's around, I need to know how to code in a language, could be any language that you want, but deployment is easier. Creating a project is easier. Being able to monitor it is
Yeah,
easier. Getting analytics, all these things. It's like one script away from like using a service that someone's already provided. So the ability to zoom out and be able to know like, okay, there's something that needs to be done here. I don't know what to do, but I know enough to know what to type into a Google search box to figure out what the service needs to be, or learn from people on like what a recommended solution is, and then be able to go ahead and do all of it. Whereas if I was very laser focused on like I'm only going to do the DevOps workflow, I only care about the deployment part of it, and I don't care about anything else, you're greatly limiting the potential you now have, because it used to be that you could be very successful focusing on just that angle because you had other people handling all these things. But technology has lowered the barrier so much that anybody can
yeah,
come in with an idea and then go from idea to something a human being can consume, whether it's an app, whether it is a website, or anything in between. It's trivial. I look at it even in terms
yeah,
of content creation. I started blogging in 1998 when it was, we talked about it in Twitter a little bit yesterday on like
yeah,
the tech stacks that I use. It still works today, and I'm happy doing it because as long as I can write words without having to write HTML or change my mental model and thinking about it in terms of code, I'm happy. Yes, it's it has rough edges, but it gets the job done. But then you look at the flip side of it in terms of like today, there's so many more tools. If I had to start over today, there's so many cooler, better ways of getting things out there where the time from idea to getting something into people's hands is extremely short. And the people who know how to leverage that, I think, are going to be the most successful because there's a little bit of a volume story needs to be played as well. It used to be that you could publish one article a month and be a magazine and be very successful. You could do a daily
yeah,
newspaper that came once every 24 hours. Now it's kind of a continuous stream of it. And it's often a case where the quantity of content often overrides maybe quality in some cases and so on.
yeah,
And I think that's where like the tension that we're going to see is going to come more into like, again, can AI help us both match quantity and quality in terms of fact checking and maybe even generation of
yeah,
visuals and so on. So it's actually really exciting. So I
yeah.
fully subscribe to your view that generalists, I think,
Thank
will
you.
be more successful in the long run than someone goes very, very deep. Really cool.
Yeah.
So, what motivated you to start creating content? You were from art to programming and then content creation. That's a full time job in its own way. So, what? Tell me more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I read this book um, a while ago called How We Learn. And uh, it kind of it digs into the science of like what works and what does not when it comes to learning a new subject, a new skill. Um, and that resonated with me so much because um, throughout my journey learning how to code, I in the moment wasn't like consciously aware of like, oh, this article is confusing, or oh, this video like really helped me, or like building X project like kind of sped up my growth and like helped me get that first job. I didn't like have the vocabulary and then understanding of like why all those things like mattered. Um, but after reading that book, I realized how important it is to um, leverage writing and teaching as a way to reinforce anything you're learning. And so I see content creation selfishly as a way to kind of be more efficient and effective with my own learning goals. And so if I'm learning how to write, then I'm going to, kind of talk about my process for writing and, kind of organizing information and outlining, editing, and like actually, publishing and getting feedback, like just talking through that whole process in public. Because the more I do that, the easier it's going to be for me to improve, that process. Having to communicate and, teach someone something that you're learning not only reinforces what you're learning, but also like helps you uncover like creative ways of, improving your process and kind of like almost establishing your own like voice and your own like ideas. And it's like, remixing, certain techniques to kind of create your own thing, something that's unique to who you are. So yeah, that was kind of like the inspiration for like going down this path. It's kind of selfish reasons. And it's funny, you see more and more people focused on the audience building part of like content creation. Like that's like the reason I create content. So I want to build an audience, and it's like, yeah, that's like, I think that's, what, most people want. And there, are a lot of benefits to having an audience, but I think it's helpful to always like, kind of fall back to, okay, what is the benefit for you actually like kind of sharing in public and, kind of building in public and creating beyond like just audience growth.
Yeah, it's a classic tension that many people jump into things focused on journey, but sorry, the destination, but not the process, not the journey that it gets into, because you need more tangible things to motivate you to keep you going than just building an audience. Because some people get lucky, and there's a survivorship bias that always kicks in when it comes to content creators, where you see those people over and over again saying like, yeah, I wrote a few posts, I became really popular, quit my job, and now I have a TV show. And that's not a
Yeah.
repeatable thing. That doesn't work for almost anybody except that one person. And it applies in like even in software engineering and in career growth in general, is that focusing on the process, focusing on improving yourself and trying to be better today than you were before. Eventually, in the long run, things may work out. But even if it didn't, your goal wasn't that things would have worked out in building an audience. You got many other smaller moments of satisfaction and happiness through what you've done. And I think self-learning, creating content for the purpose of learning something deeper, is one of the things that keeps me doing a lot of this as well. When I started off a long time ago, when I had no responsibilities, no family commitments, no job even, to be like, yeah, I just enjoy creating content because I just enjoy creating content. But now it's more of a case where the more I learn something, the more I think about why is it done this way? Because when you take something you learn and try to recreate it and try to explain to somebody, gaps in your assumption or gaps in logic on like, why did this not work this way, or why am I doing A, B, and C, makes you question things and helps you go deeper. And then what ultimately happens, at least in my case, oftentimes, is that I happen to make a career out of my hobby, which is working with developers and so on. So there'll be many times where I get cornered into a conversation where like, oh, can you explain to me why this is being done this way this is? I'm like, oh, let me tell you all about it. Do you want the 20,000-foot overview? Let me go into the nitty-gritty details of it. And these kind of activities, mostly stemming from my hobby of learning more about things to explain to other people, ends up paying huge dividends, because that's a very valuable skill, as it turns out, in just corporate life in general, is how can you simplify something at the right altitude for the person you're talking to, so that they can then figure out what to do next. And that's a superpower. I've realized is like, wow, even if I don't do any writing or anything for the content creation part of it, purely for the purpose of, being able to be more relevant in my day-to-day job, this is actually being very, very useful.
Yeah, that's spot on, man. I like that you pointed out the questions that come up, during this like, kind of journey and process. And you know, journaling is like such a big part of like my process, right? And it's like, journaling, like interstitial journaling is kind of a new thing I've been testing out, just kind of like writing notes throughout the day, um, capturing one moment, one memory from the day. And then, at the end of the week, kind of reflecting, on each day and just kind of looking at, what stands out, like patterns and using that to help inform the next week. And that's how growth actually happens. It's like everyone wants to grow, right? Everyone wants to get better and like smarter and like more efficient, more productive. Like we all want these things, but how do you actually make it happen? Like, you gotta, it's like not just journaling, it's not just reflecting, it's also like sharing and trying to explain to someone else like what's in your head and what are you learning, what are you doing, and like then like more insight, more questions like actually come out of that, you know.
Yeah, no, so true because in many ways we've been all, from a very early age, you go through the schooling system, you have a lesson plan that's been defined for you. So you're just going through the routine of going through someone else's rubric of what success and failure and all these things look like. When you start going on this own path, there is no predefined solution. You're creating everything as you go, and it's often impossible to know, am I going an upward trajectory in like whatever I'm doing, or am I just staying flat, or am I going down? And this reflecting and being able to be very honest with yourself about what am I doing, is this meaningful, is this meeting whatever long-term goal I've identified, is actually a very
Yeah.
important part of it, which you touched upon it very nicely. So you mentioned note taking. What do you use for note taking? What tool do you use? Or you pencil and paper, or is it
Yeah.
an app? What is your process there?
Yeah. So, I mean, I could talk about this for an hour probably. I'm definitely like big into like the personal knowledge management space. I think, productivity is a trendy, like hot topic, right? And there are a lot of detractors, and people that kind of make fun of like, those of us that spend so much time like optimizing like the system and like, but I think it's important because, time is our most valuable asset. And I see personal knowledge management, um, as a part of like the time management family. And it's like the whole point for me personally, is to save time and to be more efficient. Because I only have so much time, and we all only have so much time. And so, for me, my tool at the moment is Tana, which a lot of folks might not be aware of, but Tana is a combination of, tools like Roam Research, Obsidian, that have kind of popularized like this notion of backlinking between, different notes or files within, the tool, um, and Notion, which is super popular, and is more like um, a kind of way of describing Notion would be, um, like Google Docs and Evernote, um, essentially. Notion is an incredibly like valuable tool and something that I still use, but, for note taking specifically, Tana is my main tool.
Yeah, I just loaded up the Tana webpage and I'm looking through it now. Yeah, I've never heard of it, but this looks
Mhm.
impressive. Like this is exactly the kind of thing where it goes from note taking to the next steps, as well as you figure out how to go from notes to maybe structured content and then ideas and content ultimately.
Yeah, like Notion has Kanban boards and tables and, um, you know databases, and Tana has all those things as well, but combines more of a like digital garden kind of free form thinking, second brain kind of, uh, you know user experience, I should say. Versus Notion, it's like you kind of have to know exactly where you want to put things. Notion doesn't have a notion, no pun intended, of a global tagging system. So like if you just want to like create a tag, for creators, right? It's like, oh, you want to tag like, you know, every kind of, key person that you follow on Twitter, you want to create like a kind of note for them in Notion. You can't like tag them and have like kind of shared information about them outside of a database. And so you kind of are forced to like, oh, I have to create this like creator database, and then I can have tags and like metadata about creators in this database, but everything has to live in that one like space. Whereas Tana and Rome allow you to kind of put things like all over the place. And for how I work and how I think, I kind of prefer to have like the scratch pad, where it's like as soon as you open up Tana, you're presented with the day, and that's your like workspace for the day, and you can put everything there. And if I meet a new creator online, I can just like type their name, tag them with creator, and add metadata like right there in that one like view, and then I don't have to think about it. And it's kind of like a frictionless way for me to process information.
No, that's really impressive. I'm going to be trying it out probably this weekend and see how it, how it simplifies some of the work that I do and note taking and all of that. And so most content creators I know have a very strict routine or a process. We talked a little bit of note taking and how you approach some of it. What is your, is there any more details about your routine? Like, do you have a set schedule that you decide this is my focus time, where I'm going to be thinking about ideas, I'm going to be reflecting on the week, or I'm going to be creating content and posting it? What does your process for that look like?
Yeah, so I'm trying to get better at routine. That's something that's like a goal for myself in 2023. I just moved to Los Angeles. I used to live in Philadelphia, and so I've been in LA for a few months, getting used to the time difference, and I'm starting to settle in. So I feel like I'm during the holiday break going to use that time to kind of build momentum going into the new year and try to make sure I'm establishing more of a routine. But to kind of like highlight what's working for me now, around I'd say like 3 p.m. In the afternoon, I try to spend some time like off screen, writing and just kind of collecting my thoughts. And the hardest thing about that is kind of queuing up like what I want to kind of write about and kind of explore before that time. So like the day before, it's like, all right, like what is my focus like for tomorrow? And I kind of have this like, kind of process called the daily mise, which is like kind of riffed off of mise en place, which is a kind of like culinary like phrase where you're supposed to kind of put everything into place and kind of get organized for like cooking the next morning, like the day before. So it's like getting like everything organized in the kitchen, so when you come back the next day, you're just ready to go. And so I have this like daily mise process where I spend just 15 minutes like getting prepared for the next day, the day before. And so when the time comes for me to sit down and write in the afternoons, or to kind of just, think about whatever I'm learning or creating at the time, I'm not like kind of scrambling, trying to figure out like, what am I doing right now? I kind of have that prepared the day before. And then on Sundays, I do like a weekly kind of review, kind of look at my journal throughout the week. I journal every day, and to kind of use that process to inform, what I'm focusing on the next week.
How do you maintain the motivation? One of the things that often comes up is you get writer's block. You just don't feel like doing that for that day. It's like, I'm just too tired, or, the number of excuses your brain often comes up with, when it comes to doing something new, it's almost innumerable, especially so for content creation, where you're your own, in this case, setting your own deadlines, setting your own goals for doing something. There's no external pressure necessarily on forcing yourself to like just get through that initial static friction.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. It's hard. I'm not gonna lie. Like I'd say the biggest motivation is telling a lot of people that you're going to do something. So for my newsletter, Hunter Labs, I've told people like, hey, like, once a week you're going to get this newsletter. It's going to be this curated kind of, trove, this like digest of um, articles, threads from Twitter, videos on YouTube, podcasts, just like this, um, you know, collection that I feel like you like have to get through. You have to like, take a look, and I feel like you're going to benefit from what I found and what I'm sharing. And if I skip a week or like, I just don't do it, I feel bad because I told like, yeah, I have almost 600 subscribers now. And I feel bad that like, oh, hundreds of people like, know, like, that newsletter didn't come. Like, well, I wonder what's going on, And if you do that often enough, then people lose trust, right? And they doubt like um or maybe doubt's the wrong word. They question like why they're subscribed. And then maybe they just don't open your emails anymore. Like they kind of they don't get into the habit of reading your newsletter every week. Um and if you think about like, Sunday papers, like New York Times has like a huge like paper on Sundays, right? And people subscribe and they're expecting on Sunday to get that newspaper delivered. And if it doesn't come, it's like, wait, what? Like, what's going on? And that's, as a creator, like when you get into routine of publishing consistently, then you create expectations, with other people. And I think that's a way to help you stay motivated, because then you naturally don't want to disappoint, right? So especially
Yep.
disappoint people that like admire what you do. Like that's just like, not a good feeling.
No, that's so true. So by building in the public, I guess, or building the open, as the current terminology is, you are giving yourself some external motivation and pressure because you've already told people that you're going to be doing this every week, and then the expectation is that you force them to do it, but it also reaps benefits because people do enjoy the routine of it. I'm probably dating myself heavily here, but back in the day there was the cartoon series called Homestar Runner, like strong bad emails. I don't know if you ever saw them and so
Yeah.
on, but every Tuesday, I believe around 9 or 10 a.m., that's when it'd go public. And so I'd be in school at the time, and when I go to my computer classes at the time, I'd be like, okay, it's a Tuesday, I'm going to go and check it out right now. And as far as I remember, they never failed on delivering on that particular timeline. And that to me resonated immediately when you mentioned that people have an expectation or a habit to check at every certain time, especially like your content, and not having it will just cause them to lose trust because in a given day there's so many distractions. And so once it's not there, it's going to be at the bottom of the queue. And as we'll talk about maybe later on, there's so many things that are going on that compete for your attention, especially online, that the goal really is to make sure your content is not immediately bubble up to the top, but many other things get provided in the interim instead. No, that is really cool. So you
Yeah.
mentioned newsletter. What service do you use for your newsletter?
I'm currently using Substack.
Okay.
And it's not perfect. There are so many things I like about it, a lot of things that I don't, but I've stuck with it, primarily because the writing experience is just second to none. Like
Yeah.
it's a joy to use the editor, um, and as a writer, like that really matters to me. A lot of the functionality that you get in other tools, for growth and just kind of general marketing aren't there, and that's kind of frustrating at times. But Substack has also, I think, perfectly walked the line of building community and a network without it being a social network.
Yeah.
And so, they rolled out recommendations this year that allow any newsletter creator to recommend another newsletter. And that creates this through reciprocity, it creates this like network effect where like you recommend a newsletter and people subscribe to that newsletter, and then that newsletter author gets notified, and then in turn they recommend your newsletter, and you keep doing that a few times, and over the course of a few months, maybe you have 4 or 5 newsletters recommending you, and their audience can discover you, and it's a solid way to grow. Other platforms have kind of adopted this as well, so it's not unique to Substack, but I have some great recommendations on Substack, and it would be hard to just like walk away from like that network effect.
Correct. It creates stickiness. We always talk about community building, and the community, any company can go and just replicate technology, replicate a product, but the community that you build around it, that's the thing that keeps you going back to wherever you started from, because that cannot be replicated. You can't just transport people who are like loosely interested in something over to something completely brand new. That's very true.
Exactly.
And I also know you're very active on Twitter as well. What other networks do you post on? Is it primarily newsletters and Twitter, or are you active in other channels also?
That's primarily it. I also am a partner in a uh, like entertainment company, and so uh, for that, we actually have like a social media manager that works with us. And like, she's incredible. And so for that company, we leverage LinkedIn and Instagram as well. But like for my own personal stuff, yeah, I'm just focused on Twitter and Substack right now. And I think for individual creators that aren't like running a company with a lot of different concerns, I think focusing on 1 or 2 platforms is important, and kind of nailing those before you kind of broaden out to other platforms. I think you can stretch yourself too thin, and you're better off like kind of drilling on one platform, maybe two. You see a lot of writers focusing on Twitter and LinkedIn. Those are like the main 2 platforms that a lot of writers are just kind of like, doubling down on. And then once you reach kind of a certain threshold on those platforms, folks tend to move into newsletters and YouTube or TikTok.
What are your thoughts on the many people, me included sometimes, not consistently, of taking content from Twitter, copying that into an image, putting it on Instagram, and then making that into a short, like 1 minute video introducing that content and posting it on YouTube Shorts, on Instagram again, and also on TikTok? What are your thoughts on that? Because you're kind of taking the same content, you're not creating anything new, you're just repurposing it for the format at hand without having to think deeply about recreating or thinking about how to optimize it for all these unique segments.
Yeah, I know a ton of people that do that effectively. Um, and tools like Hype Fury, I recall, actually make this really easy to do, where they'll actually create the um, kind of snapshot image of your tweet for you, and you can just connect your Instagram account, and they'll post uh, these images to Instagram on your behalf. And a lot of creators have used that technique to grow. Instagram, I'd say the only thing about Twitter that your listeners may or may not be aware of, um, it's hard to grow on Twitter, like in comparison to Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. Twitter is the hardest nut to crack. It's incredibly difficult. And so, I think leveraging Instagram to grow your Twitter following is a smart way to go. Because I think the algorithm is just friendlier,
Yeah.
and you'll have an opportunity to reach more people. So,
So, this is an interesting question because, and I'm curious to get your take on it. You mentioned posting on Instagram to grow your Twitter audience. Well, it's always hard though, because on the other hand, you have a newsletter as well. Do you, have your Instagram audience using them to grow your newsletter audience, or you prefer they grow the Twitter audience, who then will use that to then grow your newsletter audience because it goes one level, in the other direction. But what is your take on that?
Oh, that's a good question, man. I don't know. I haven't given that a ton of thought. In this moment, I would say the Instagram Twitter connection is strong because you literally can see, oh, this is a tweet, right? So like if you're on Instagram and you're just scrolling and you see this like tweet shot, I think that's what like,
Yeah.
you know, some people call them. It's very clear like what it is. Like, oh, this is a tweet, and like, oh, I resonate with this content. Let me like this image. And then you've already kind of registered the handle, um, you know, and if you have a Twitter account, which most people on Instagram do, you're just going to open up Twitter and be like, oh, I wonder what else this person is sharing on Twitter, and maybe you follow them. And so that's like an easy bridge, I think. Getting folks from Instagram to a newsletter is hard, I think, because you can't share links in Instagram posts. You can only add a link to your profile. And so, you know, with Instagram, you know, you're just hoping that people click on your handle, go to your profile, and click on that link. But with the tweets as images on Instagram, you're kind of cheating, right? Like that's why it works, because it's like the screenshot of the tweet is essentially a link, because like the link is already generated in your brain, right? You already know like, oh, this is a tweet. I'll go on Twitter. Let me find it. And so, and that's like, it's basically like the like snail way of like getting a link to show up in someone's head, right? And so, yeah, I think the newsletter to Instagram connection is more difficult, but not possible.
Yeah, that's actually really great. It's almost like the tweet image. It's like a QR code that your brain just like registers and is able to like remember when you're
That's
like.
a better way of explaining it. Yes,
Yeah, one of the
that
things.
is like the. I gotta quote that. That is a brilliant way to describe like. Um,
That's awesome. One of the things that you mentioned, and consistently, is that you mentioned that creators should take a data-driven approach. That it's not just about just throwing things out there, but actually measuring it and analyzing it. And what are some aha moments you discovered as taking this approach? Is there something you realized before you were doing something more data-driven, and after you're data-driven, you're like, wait, this thing that I always assumed to be a workable solution turns out to not be as effective as what I thought it would be.
That's a good question. So I've taken a data-driven approach, but admittedly, I've focused on the wrong data at times. You know, you hear the phrase vanity metrics, but it's like, oh, what are vanity metrics on Twitter? What are vanity metrics on LinkedIn? And like, how do I avoid like getting excited about them? And so, for example, you know, getting a ton of likes for a tweet is like such a adrenaline rush and a dopamine hit, and retweets as well. Like seeing something that's like kind of get a ton of attention and a lot of impressions is like, wow, this is like kind of thrilling, right? But if you're not actually getting people to, comment or to follow you from that tweet, then it's actually not something you should like double down on or should focus on. You should try and figure out, okay, like a lot of people enjoyed this, but why is no one following me? Like, why is no one commenting or like being more engaged with this content? However, if you like tweet something and you're getting maybe not a lot of likes and retweets, but a lot of people are commenting, right? There's like a discussion happening, right? It's like, it's social media, right? You're like it should be this like social experience um, where conversations are happening. So if like that's happening and maybe you get a few followers, like that's a better signal. Like that's something that you should really focus on. And so, I've tried to get better at that. It's hard though, because like human nature is like, oh, look at all these likes, right? Oh, like look at all these retweets. But um, no, focusing on like what's actually driving like more followers and more conversations, more direct messages, like more people reaching out to you and saying, hey, like this really resonated with me. Thank you for sharing. Like that's powerful. Like getting, uh, having those conversations and learning from, complete strangers, like why something resonated with them, why they retweeted something, why they followed you, right? Like, I think one of the like there's a lot of low hanging fruit, right? One of the best things you can do is like someone follows you, you just like send them a DM and be like, hey, like I'm just curious, like what motivated you to follow me? Thanks for following me. I'm just curious, so
Yeah, I think you did that when I followed you, and that's actually what got us started to converse. And I think it was such a brilliant way of doing things. By the way, I think it adds a personal touch to it because everyone expects it to be automated, impersonal, and like as robotic
mhm.
as you can imagine. But getting that DM from you, I was like, wow, it's a human being here. It's actually adds a personal touch. And in typical, like if you look at psychology and marketing, it gets you more emotionally invested in what you're creating as opposed to it just being a random name and an avatar that I've been following like the thousands of other people on Twitter that exist there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one question I have, you mentioned that you have a tweet in Instagram and then it's very recognizable. The recognizable part is what I want to dive into a little bit, and I might even touch upon a little bit about your art background and so on. Is that how do you make your personal brand on Twitter more recognizable, more appealing, more visually just like memorable in some ways? For example, your name shows up as DKH, for example. I know before we started this recording, you mentioned that there's something you might want to share a little bit more about that. But even beyond that, like your profile picture, like the bio, like all these things play into this overall narrative of who you are. And I do think it plays an important role. I'm curious to hear your story around how you chose the things you chose.
Yeah. So, Daniel is such a common name that I wanted to kind of experiment with this idea of um, using, my initials as a way for people to kind of differentiate me from other Dans, right? There are a lot of Dans and a lot of popular Dans like on Twitter and in like the creator space. And so it's like, someone being able to refer to me as like, oh, that's DKH versus like, oh, Dan or Dan Hunter, just kind of for me felt like a more unique thing and more interesting thing to try out. I, of course, could get feedback where people are like, I don't like it, or like, oh, it's confusing, or I can find you, or whatever, right? But it's something I'm willing to experiment with and try. There is precedence for this. So, you know, a lot of folks may have heard of DHH.
Correct.
DHH is the creator of this open source tool called Ruby on Rails. He's also the founder of, or co-founder of 37 Signals, which they made the Basecamp project management software and the Hey email like service. And so, you know, not to get into politics, but AOC is obviously like one of the more like popular examples of this here in the United States. She's a congresswoman based in New York City. And so there's like, people do this. So it's not like I'm like kind of coming out of nowhere with this approach. So,
No, it makes a lot of sense as well
yeah.
because when you look at numbers and phone numbers and like what things people can remember very easily, A collection of three symbols, whether it's letters or numbers or so on, is very, very easily memorable and also recallable as well. It's like you see it, and then I think a lot of studies have shown that 30 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes later, people can recall those three things they've seen, but anything beyond that, it becomes difficult. Like the dashes in a phone number are probably make the memorization a little easier. You have like three numbers and then another three numbers. Hopefully the area code is something that's common for many people, but there were cell phones it is not because we all moved around and we all have things from everywhere else. But I really like your idea there. That's actually a really interesting insight that I never thought about. That having it be a few letters makes it easier. And I just did a quick search for DKH on Twitter. Yeah, you're the first name that comes up. So even I use an incognito window. I'm not following you just to see what happens when I just type it in normally. That ties in the full narrative of I'm on Instagram. I see a tweet by you. I see DKH as the name. I might still be surfing Instagram, like going to many other things. Then I come back and go like, oh, let me just type in DKH because it's memorable, and you're the first result that comes up on Twitter. I see your content, and I see your pinned tweet. Seems very relevant. Follow conversion. Full end to end journey
Right.
there.
Yeah,
No, that
yeah.
was brilliant.
And then the other stuff you asked about, like profile image and the bio and all that, like um, man, there's so much to kind of like touch on there. I'd say like you don't need to overthink it. The image I think is kind of like you know um, totally up to your personality, right? It's like one of the core parts of my personality is my smile. Like I just um, I've always kind of been that way. A lot of people kind of when I've heard folks like talk about conversations that I wasn't part of, like, oh yeah, like Daniel has a great smile, like that's a core part of who he is. He has so much joy for life, so optimistic, right? Like so, um, you know, that's part of the reason why I chose the image that I did. The bio, I think it's important to um, highlight like what you write about. Twitter is a write first like platform. Yeah, people share videos and um, images and other forms of media, but writing is like the um, core part of um, Twitter, and so articulating what you write about, what you're thinking about, I think is important in your bio. Um, and, something that other people in the kind of target audience that you're focused on can resonate with. And so, being a part of, the creator space and being an engineer, one thing I really wanted to put in my bio was how I am an imposter syndrome survivor. And, uh, I think a lot of people can resonate with that. Um, and, and then I just have like a couple, um, mentions of other accounts that I, kind of manage on Twitter.
Cool. No, that is really cool. And I like the authenticity of being able to say that you're an imposter. So because I find many bios are artificially trying to be something that is painting a very particular picture that isn't about that person itself. And also, like, I think the way you mentioned also about your profile reflecting your own personality, I think that is also critical as well because, it's easy to want to be something that you're not, and having all that be shown in like your username and your profile and all of that. But as your content starts getting to hit people's feed, if there's a mismatch between that just creates this cognitive dissonance where they're like, no, this doesn't add up, so I'm not going to do this. And it's much easier to be yourself. Like when you go back to the process of writing and generating content and writer's block and all of that, much easier for you to just relate to your own way of thinking about things and transfer that. And some people like it, some people don't. But in the day, it's not a numbers game. It's about kind of get quality of engagement, kind of get a quality number of people who care about what I'm doing and do some really great work there.
Absolutely. Yep.
Perfect. Well, Dan, we touched upon a lot of great topics. Thank you so much for everything. Is there any final parting words you'd like to share?
No, I would just say, I mean, maybe the only thing I would share in closing is to, focus on what you like truly need to learn, and leverage that to quote unquote build an audience. Don't like um, kind of arbitrarily pick a topic because it's popular. And then like force yourself to learn that thing in order to build like authenticity, right, and authority, right. I think focus on uh, where you are in your professional career, or where you are in your creator journey, what you need to learn, and then share that, and grow from there. You can always like niche down further, um, but I would just encourage people not to just pick a topic or pick a niche that is popular and like is trendy. I think that's um, you know a path to burnout, and like kind of giving up when things get hard.
Perfect. Well, Dan, thank you so much, and we should absolutely do this again another time.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.